Today's video is sponsored by Nintendo.
Going into 2024, I never imagined in a million years that one of my absolute favorite games of the year would end up being a visual novel adventure type game, and I certainly didn't think that game would end up being in the Famicom Detective Club series. And yet here we are, and one of my absolute favorite video game experiences of the year is Emio the Smiling Man. Excuse me, sorry. The Emio the Smiling Man Famicom Detective Club game for the Nintendo Switch family of systems. Is that better? Nintendo sponsoring today's video. I don't want them to have Emio come after me for saying the title wrong. And I also want to preface this discussion that I literally already had this video planned before Nintendo reached out and wanted to sponsor the video. So these are all 110% my actual true opinions on the game. And also, you guys know this, I work with Nintendo all the time, and I've never been one to shy away from negative opinions if I don't end up liking a certain game. Star Fox Zero.
What do you mean you didn't like the motion controls, the Wii U?
Again, the game's got an audience, Emio. The game's got an audience, it just wasn't for me. Leave me alone. Now, some of you might not remember this, but when the game was first initially announced, all Nintendo did was put out a tweet that said, "Who is Emio?" with one hashtag and then a 6-second teaser of Emio just kind of standing there. And I think a lot of people assumed that this game was going to end up being Nintendo's take on the horror genre. And that teaser already had the M rating on it, so a lot of people were like, whoa, this is going to be a much darker narrative than we expect from this company. Then we eventually found out that it wasn't just some new franchise. This is actually the newest iteration of the Famicom Detective Club series, which just a couple years ago was rebooted on Nintendo Switch with the remakes of the first two games in the franchise, The Missing Heir and The Girl Who Stands Behind. Now, I played both of those games on stream when they were first released. I actually did a whole book club stream with some of the other Nintendo brand ambassadors talking about our thoughts on the story and the twists and the turns and the gameplay. And honestly, I just had a really good time playing those games, so I was personally absolutely thrilled that we were getting a new game in the Famicom Detective Club franchise. And then I was made even more intrigued by the fact that Sakamoto-san put out that video talking about the fact that they really worked hard on the narrative, and he thinks the ending might be polarizing for people, but ultimately they just worked really hard to make this an amazing title. And I gotta say, the work shows. This is without question the best Famicom Detective Club game, period. And I would even go so far as to say I think this is one of the best narratives that Nintendo has crafted within the last decade. The story is going to take you on so many different twists and turns. I think the characterization in this one is by far the best that the franchise has ever had, and I also genuinely feel like this is going to be people's best entry point into the Famicom Detective Club series. You do not need to play the other two games to actually enjoy Emio the Smiling Man. Again, it might help. There are certain moments where there are fun little Easter eggs for people who played those games. So for example, there's a moment in chapter 3 or chapter 4 that I did on stream in which you can actually call somebody from one of the previous games and you get this fun little interaction. But again, it's not something that's necessary to enjoy the narrative. And while I do feel like not needing to have played the other games in this franchise is a big reason as to why I feel like this one acts as a great entry point for potential new fans, I also feel like the quality of life changes, while subtle that they made to the gameplay, are actually a pretty big deal. So basically, for those of you who don't know the minute-to-minute gameplay of the Famicom Detective Club games, the game has you investigating the crimes by basically interrogating people, finding out more information, writing down that information in your notebook, and then looking to all the different clues to try to piece together who the killer is. And then at the end of each chapter, you basically reconvene with your friend Ayumi, and you go over everything that you learned from that day's worth of investigation to try to piece together more information that's going to help you solve the crime. And usually the investigation interrogation portions of the games have you in a first-person perspective in which you are talking to either suspects, victims, or even just bystanders and trying to glean more information about the case. You can ask them more information about things they know, you can just listen to what they have to say, you could show them potential evidence, and throughout the course of the story you sort of piece together what exactly is happening here. Now, with previous games in the franchise, I think there would be certain moments in which I'd be really engrossed in the story and I'd want to find out more information, and I'd go through every single option, and yet still none of those options would be the correct one to get more information. So then the only thing left to do is to go through every single option again, even though I already chose all the ones that made sense for a certain scenario. And I feel like that doesn't happen nearly as much in Emio the Smiling Man. The writing in this one does a great job of guiding you in the right direction with certain keywords, but not just outright telling you what it is you need to do. And again, the previous games in the franchise also had a feature that this one has, which is that in certain scenarios, if there's something that obviously you need to ask somebody about, the little option in the menu will be highlighted yellow, but that's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the actual dialogue of the characters. Somebody will mention an offhand thing about like an eggplant, or they'll mention something about a flower, and because that character mentioned that thing, even though the game is not telling you, hey, maybe ask about the flower, you kind of know in your brain 3-4 conversations later, hey, I remember this person brought up a flower, I should ask them about it. But the great thing about the writing in Emio the Smiling Man is that you do have these brief moments of levity that are thrown in there with all the heavy themes, but those moments of levity actually feel earned. One of my favorite characters, for example, is Fukuyama-san, who is the teacher of the first murder victim in this game. And you basically go back time and time again to the school to ask him more information about the students and their relationships to that kid that died. And I do feel like the first couple times that you're talking to him, you find like he's kind of an idiot. Like the way that he talks about Ayumi and his relationship to her, because they both went to the same middle school, and now Ayumi's grown up and she's investigating the crime, and Fukuyama can't get over his childhood crush, but he's also trying to give you important information and also shielding things from you. I feel like just the way the dialogue works in those sequences, and you can go back and watch my live streams of some of those early chapters when you're on sort of like the dates with him, asking him more information about the students. It is so well done. I was sitting there like angry at this character for doing certain things while at the same time understanding where he was coming from due to what's going on within the rest of his life. It is so well written, and I can't dive too much into spoilers here without obviously giving away the ending of the game. But again, there are so many characters that are written like that. Characters sometimes that even only show up for one chapter, but that one chapter really does end up leaving an impact on you. And speaking of characters that really left an impact on me in this game, I gotta give a shout out to my girl Ayumi Tachibana, the MVP of Famicom Detective Club. Now, if you've played any of the previous games in this franchise, you know she's your co-worker in The Missing Heir. She knew the murder victim and the girl who stands behind. She's directly involved with that investigation. And this time around, she's still your co-worker, but she's essentially the full secondary playable protagonist in this game. And I found myself time and time again looking forward to the chunks of the game in which she played as Ayumi, because again, they are so well written and they are sort of these brief moments of levity within this otherwise very, very dark story. That's not to say she doesn't take the crime seriously, she absolutely does, but I do feel like her sequences sort of remove you from the grim darkness of it all and actually do sort of shine a light on the goofy moments within some of these other characters' lives. Very, very well done. Shout out to Ayumi. And now I also want to say, side note, as somebody who mostly covers Smash Brothers on the YouTube channel, I gotta say, Ayumi Tachibana for whenever we end up getting the next Smash Brothers game. I already can envision her final smash from this game alone. I can envision her character trailer. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to spoil stuff, but I'm telling you, Ayumi Tachibana for the win. And I just realized I've been talking about this game for nearly 10 minutes already, and I haven't even touched on two of my absolute favorite aspects about the game, and that's its music and its presentation. Now, I've always liked the chirpy kind of music within the Famicom Detective Club games, but man, oh man, is it good here. The character themes of some of these characters resonated with me, and I was still humming them weeks after I had beaten the game. And in addition to that, I feel like the actual overall music, the menu music, the main theme of the game is all so well done. It feels both ripped out of like an 80s, 90s J-drama, while at the same time feels modern. And I can kind of say the same thing about the actual anime aesthetic of the game as well. Obviously, if you like city pop, if you like 80s and 90s cool Japan, this game is going to be right up your alley. To be fair, this whole franchise is going to be up your alley, but this game in particular does a really good job of capturing the time. Throughout the course of the game, you use this giant brick cell phone, and you'll notice Nintendo Famicom systems on people's desks, and just overall, it really does feel like you've been transported back to that era of Japan, and it makes the actual story feel all that more interesting because the world really does feel lived in. When you're walking through alleyways of Japan, talking to citizens and bystanders, trying to find out more information about Emio, you meet these little kids who have Emio paper bags on their heads that are actually trying to replicate the urban legend because they find it interesting. You'll run into old ladies who are just doing their grocery shopping. You'll run into old men who are just ranting, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I think that might actually mean something 3 or 4 chapters later. It's just such a cool world to explore, and I'm very much looking forward to if they ever end up coming back to this again, because I really, really, really loved it. Another thing that I actually really appreciate about this game too is that in the era of these 80, 90, 100 hour long games, This is a game you can feasibly beat. The game overall took about 10 to 12 hours to get to the final credits, and the entire way through I was fully engaged. I was never bored. The pacing was very well done. The revelations that you find out each chapter I thought were also paced out very nicely, and overall I just had a great time with Emio the Smiling Man Famicom Detective Club.
Oh, so you can say the name of the game right. Well done.
Simply put, if you're a fan of my YouTube channel, which means you probably like anime and manga and a good story and you're into Nintendo, this gets my absolute highest recommendation. This is absolutely a must buy. And I'd also say if maybe you're a new viewer who just found me from this video, I would say if you are a big fan of narrative-driven games or you just like to curl up with a good book at night, this game is the way to go. And again, it is the perfect entry point for the Famicom Detective Club series. You can play the other games, and I recommend you do, but really, Emio the Smiling Man Famicom Detective Club is the best place to start.